U.S. unleashes LNG tsunami. Europe's green shield is failing.
U.S. LNG floodgates opened. Brussels on the brink.
U.S. approves 28 million tons per annum LNG export. Europe's climate wall gives way.
It's official. The CP2 LNG project is greenlit, and Trump's energy gamble is already sending shockwaves across the Atlantic. The U.S. wins billions. Europe loses credibility. Because even as EU leaders preach carbon neutrality, they're buying more American gas than ever before. And behind closed doors, one question haunts Brussels. Has Europe just traded its climate soul for energy survival? We're standing at a turning point. Under Donald Trump's administration, the U.S. just approved the mega export project known as Venture Global CP2, 28 million metric tons per annum of liquefied natural gas. That's not a ripple, it's a tsunami, and it's heading straight into Europe's climate agenda. Let's set the scene. For years, Europe has promised green, clean, net zero. It set bold targets, pledged to phase out fossil fuels, banked on renewables. Meanwhile, the U.S. talked energy dominance, American energy, global leadership. Now, those slogans collide. Here's the first layer. What happened? The U.S. Department of Energy approved the CP2 project, sanctioning vast LNG exports from Louisiana to global markets. 28 MTPA is the official figure. That's roughly 39 billion cubic meters of gas a year. Huge. Why does that matter? Because late last year, Europe's total LNG imports from non-Russian suppliers were in the ballpark of 140 billion cubic meters. So adding nearly 40 billion in American supply shifts the map.
But wait, Europe didn't just import more US LNG, it also soaked up record Russian shipments. Yes, despite all the rhetoric about decoupling from Russian gas. So Europe is straining two contradictory commitments: greener future, but heavier gas intake. That raises one question: is Europe's climate program built on shaky foundations? Let me pull you into the geopolitics. The US, under Trump, is using LNG not just as energy, but as leverage. Export volume gives Washington an economic tool, a geopolitical card. For Europe, the more it relies on US LNG, the more its autonomy is tested. The irony: Europe, champion of decarbonization, now depends more than ever on fossil fuel from America. Let's go back in time a little. In 2015-20, Europe pushed hard on renewables: wind, solar, batteries. Natural gas was called a bridge fuel. The goal: shrink coal, then gas, then renewables. But then external shocks hit. Pandemics, supply disruptions, the war in Ukraine. Europe flipped. Gas became urgent. Security had to trump green plans. Into that gap stepped American exporters, ready to fill, ready to profit, ready to reshape alliances. Now we arrive at why the CP2 deal matters so much. Exports at 28 MTPA mean the U.S. will add capacity that rivals entire national output of many producing nations. It alters balance, supply chain, pricing, politics. Europe isn't the sole destination, but is a big player. When volumes go up, contract terms change, spot markets ripple, bargaining power shifts.
And that's when Europe's climate ambitions get real stress tested. Imagine Brussels sitting in a meeting planning to cut gas consumption, yet American tankers arrive with LNG contracts that lock in decades of use. In effect, Europe's future choices get pre-committed today. New infrastructure, terminals, pipelines, once built, curtail the speed to transition to green. Let's talk dollars and deals. LNG exports mean U.S. capital is flowing overseas. American jobs anchored in export plants, American shipping, American yards. The U.S. wins. For Europe, it pays. Money leaves, contracts bind, flexibility shrinks. On the climate front, natural gas still emits CO2. It may emit less than coal, yes, but it's not zero carbon. If Europe is to meet its net zero targets, emissions falling by 55% by 2030 versus 1990 levels, heavy new gas flows push the starting point higher. The European Commission will have to adjust. Either green goals get delayed or budgets get reset, or both. Now, let's zoom in on the supply chain angle. If U.S. supply grows, gas could flood European spot markets, prices could soften, older contracts get renegotiated. That sounds good for consumers, until we consider the contract lock-in and infrastructure build-out. Terminals are expensive, shipping, investment. Every dollar sunk is a dollar committed to decades of use. That's the structural risk.
Here's a tension. Europe's leaders were banking on gas decline. Instead, they're managing growth. Green energy should be replacing gas, but in many cases, it's supplementing it. Europe may hit its 2030 wind and solar goals, yes, but simultaneously discovering gas demand rising or staying stubborn. The result, bigger energy bills, more foreign dependency, slower transition. So what's the immediate fallout? First, Europe may need to tone down its climate rhetoric. It may have to extend deadlines. It may face internal political backlash from citizens who feel green promises are being traded for reliance on fossil imports. Second, the US's energy diplomacy gains might create strain. Allies ask, are you a partner or a supplier? Does supplying gas translate to influence over policy? That question is live. Third, for markets, this portends higher LNG competition. US versus Qatar versus Russia. Spot prices may be more volatile. Long-term contracts get rethought. And we're only at the middle of the story, because what happens next will determine whether this becomes a blip or a rupture. In Part 2, we'll explore the global implications, what this means for the global energy map, for China, for Australia, for developing economies, and for Europe's green future. Stick with me. We've traced the shockwave, US approval of huge LNG exports under President Trump, Europe's green ambition colliding with supply realities, the financial and political stakes rising. Now you understand the how and the why, but the what next, that's where the real tension lies. Let's move into it.
The dust hasn't even settled, and already the world is redrawing its energy lines. After the CP2 approval, one thing became clear. This wasn't just an American business move, it was a geopolitical message. Energy dominance is back, and Trump's administration made sure everyone heard it. Washington's logic is simple and brutal. If America supplies the gas, it controls the leverage. For Europe, that means cheaper energy today, but deeper dependency tomorrow. And in global terms, it turns energy into a currency of influence. Think about it. Every LNG cargo leaving Louisiana now carries more than fuel, it carries power. And as those tankers dock in Spain, France, and the Netherlands, they don't just fill terminals, they reshape alliances. Inside Brussels, the anxiety is growing louder. Officials admit off-record, the math doesn't add up. Europe can't claim to cut emissions while importing record fossil fuel. It can't champion green leadership while locking decades of gas contracts. So what happens? Either the EU rewrites its climate goals or pretends this is temporary. Neither looks good politically. Behind closed doors, economists whisper a harder truth. Europe's renewables rollout is slowing. Costs have surged, supply chains are strained, and voters are growing restless over energy prices. So when Washington offers LNG as security, it feels like relief. But that relief has a timer. Every deal signed today binds future leaders to fossil fuel dependency. That's the paradox at the heart of this story. The US wins politically by selling what Europe says it no longer wants.
Now, let's widen the lens. The CP2 project doesn't just affect Europe, it shifts the global LNG hierarchy. By 2028, with CP2 online, the US will surpass Qatar as the world's top LNG exporter. That means price control, contract power, and geopolitical weight. In other words, the US becomes OPEC's gas equivalent. And that's where this story gets darker. Because while America expands exports, Russia and Qatar aren't standing still. Russia reroutes gas to Asia, Qatar doubles down on long-term supply to China. And China, quietly, wins both ways. It buys cheap LNG, secures long contracts, and watches the US and EU struggle over climate ideals. Energy competition turns global power into a chessboard again. But this time, the pieces are frozen gas molecules. Let's talk consequences, real ones. 1, for Europe's energy mix. More terminals, more storage, more fossil infrastructure. 2, for the climate. Upward emissions pressure just when they're supposed to fall. 3, for politics. Widening rift between what leaders promise and what reality demands. It's not panic, it's paralysis. Europe's trapped between ideals and necessity. Meanwhile, in the US, the administration celebrates jobs, investment, and influence. Louisiana alone expects thousands of new positions,
billions in revenue. Energy executives call it a new American century of gas. Environmentalists call it a death blow to climate credibility. Both are right from their side of the mirror.
There's another layer here, the financial system. Each LNG terminal requires billions in capital, much from private equity and foreign investors. That money locks into assets meant to last 30 years. So even if public policy shifts toward renewables, financial inertia keeps gas alive. That's the real power, not politics, not speeches, but money frozen into infrastructure. Across the Atlantic, European leaders try to mask dependency by rebranding it as energy partnership. But insiders know it's leverage disguised as cooperation, because whoever controls the tap controls the timeline, and Washington now holds that tap. Listen carefully to the narrative coming out of Brussels. You'll hear phrases like transitional stability, supply diversification, temporary reliance, but those words all mean the same thing: delay. Delay in cutting emissions, delay in scaling renewables, delay in achieving autonomy. And delay is dangerous because it normalizes backsliding while pretending progress. By now, the contradiction is too visible to hide. Europe's climate defenses are not collapsing from external attack, they're crumbling from internal compromise. Because in trying to stay warm, affordable, and safe, Europe is sacrificing consistency, and consistency is the foundation of trust. Once citizens stop believing in the green transition, politics tilts fast.
That's the genius of Washington's move. It doesn't force Europe's hand, it makes Europe believe it has no choice. The environmental fallout is still being assessed. Activists warn that upstream methane leakage from US production cancels out any cleaner-than-coal argument. Scientists fear emissions accounting loopholes since exported gas emissions count abroad, not at home, meaning the US can boast falling domestic emissions while fueling foreign pollution. It's not a climate fix, it's a carbon export. As we wrap up, look at the bigger picture. The CP2 project symbolizes more than a facility. It marks the return of raw energy geopolitics. The era of green consensus is ending. Nations are reverting to survival logic, supply first, ideals later. And under President Trump, that logic becomes doctrine. Europe now faces three choices. 1. Double down on renewables despite cost. 2. Accept gas dependence and rewrite climate goals. Or 3. Attempt a hybrid model, 1 foot on the accelerator, 1 foot on the brake. Each option carries a price, economic, political, or moral. History shows this pattern. When survival meets ideology, survival wins. The question is, at what cost to credibility, cooperation, and the planet itself? In the end, the LNG tsunami wasn't just about fuel. It was about the quiet dismantling of Europe's moral high ground, done not with bombs or sanctions, but with cargo ships and contracts. Trump's America didn't need to confront Europe to dominate it. It just needed to sell it gas. And Europe, desperate, divided, and freezing, said yes. That's the real story, and it's only just begun.